All right, on today's episode of Mish, we're going to talk a little bit about democracy, if it's a good thing, and what is a constitutional republic? So which one? And my guest will be Tony Moffatt. So looking forward to having you. Welcome back to Mish, This is yet another episode without my partner in crime, Dusty. He will be back eventually, I promise. Maybe sooner rather than later. Just had some chats with him, and work's been busy, so he might be getting through some hiring actions to help relieve some of that extra work he's got to do. So, but with me again is Mr. Tony Moffatt.
Good day. If you have me on enough times, maybe he'll get in more of a hurry to get back.
Maybe what we'll do is add an image of you up there.
I think we established so that I have to really up my beard or mustache game in order to make it onto the panel there.
Well, Abby can come up with something.
Can't you?
Yeah,
okay.
With something. Abby, the intern, rather.
I'm all in.
Yeah. So Tony's going to guest with me. We just had breakfast yesterday, and we had a good conversation. And what's on the docket today is democracy. You hear, hey, we need to uphold our democracy. Don't vote for that guy if we want to retain our democracy or protect our democracy. It's a buzzword. It's a buzzword that kind of elicits a response from me. I think I've probably clued the listener in on what that response is, but we'll talk about it later. They could probably guess right now. So it is a buzzword, and there's a mouthful to it. There's a lot of meaning behind that word, and it sounds like a good thing, does it not?
Absolutely, it does. And I believe actually that polls bear this out. If you go out and ask the average American citizen whether or not we live in a democracy, they're going to say yes. Right. And when, in fact, our founders would tell you that that's not the case.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit before about that, and I know I've got some, subject matter expertise, but I've done some reading.
Sure.
No G. And I've read a lot of stuff, but you were talking about some things maybe out of the Federalist Papers.
Yes. Well, absolutely. And the founders had actually said, and I believe it was Adams in Federalist 10, and I'm sure somebody can go and fact check me on that. But what he was basically saying, he was making the case that we want to avoid democracy because he believed that inside of a true democracy, a full-on democracy, just vote of the 51% rules are the seeds of mob rule. And they drew a very distinct difference between the mob rules that just get all of the laws on the books through democratic means and that sort of thing, but also just whatever the whim of the masses was at the time becomes democracy. And so they were even talking about at that time in the writing of the Federalist Papers, or the writing of the letters that became the Federalist Papers. They were talking about we do not want straight democracy. We want some elements of democracy, but they had very good and very well thought out reasons for an understanding of history as to why they did not want to have democracy.
So maybe it would be beneficial. I'll give Adam's version of what democracy is, and then maybe talk about a definition of a constitutional republic and contrast those two. So democracy is. Besides mob rule, but we'll ignore that for just a minute.
Sure.
Because that's really an argument that you make from what democracy is, which is, like you said, if you have a group of people, let's say it is 100 people, if a majority, in a lot of cases, though, it's not always a majority, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but if you have a majority, so in this case, 50%, plus one or 51%. It depends on how you define it.
Right.
And those rules should be laid out in your kind of business rules for if it's a board or maybe another group. 50% plus one or 51%. They can be two different numbers. And then if you get a majority of those folks, however you define that, then that decision will move forward. And so what you have is in our case, in a government's case, a democracy would be applied. We would elect representatives. Those representatives would move to, they would convene, and they would vote on things that we wanted them to vote on, and then the majority would rule, whether that majority was 50% plus 1 or 51%. Again, they could be two different things, and the math whizzes out there can figure this out themselves. The other way that can happen is let me do another distinction just to further confuse the matter, because I went through this with another group. It could be a plurality. Mm-hmm. So a plurality is not necessarily a majority. So let's say we had 100 people in a group. Let's say we were a group of aviation enthusiasts, and we were going to buy a plane. And if we did not have that defined, whether we're going to use plurality, majority, and the majority further defined, whether it's 50% plus 1 or 51%, a vocal plurality can show up to vote. And if you have a bunch of abstaining votes, but let's say it was just 20 people that voted that were there present, and they had 5 that voted against and 15 that voted for, the uninitiated would say, oh, we have a majority. We have 15 votes for, 5 against. It passes. We're going to go buy this plane.
Right.
And so very quickly you can get yourself into trouble. So democracy is unconstrained voting that the majority rules, period, or plurality. Break. The founders didn't want a democracy because of the dangers of it, because they wanted to protect the individual's rights. So what does that mean? So they set up a constitutional republic where you still vote for representatives. You can't get around that. You could have open referenda for certain motions, but these representatives, you have to engage the representation system to where the other things that go on in a governing body can take care of business without engaging the entire group. It's infeasible to do it any other way with 300 million people in the country.
Right. Yeah.
So, constitutional republic, we still vote and we express our wishes for our representatives to vote a certain way, but they are constrained by the structure of the government, and it's a very complicated structure. It's a structure designed, and this isn't just my opinion, designed to slow things down.
Right. To be complicated on purpose and
Right.
deliberate.
Slow and deliberate, because otherwise the whims of the people could thwart the rights of the individual, and we wanted to protect the rights of the individual. Not saying that one guy can just, I say we don't have a common defense and we don't use military forces at all. We just disband all armies and never have one. That's not what I mean. What I mean by that is an individual, I guess the best way to say it, that definite article, the individual is now, their rights are protected. Not groups, not racial groups, not ethnic groups, not groups of this special interest or that special interest, because that's where you get into trouble, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. So anyway, your thoughts on those two definitions. Are they sound or good enough?
I think they're good enough. I think they're good working definitions for us. The one thing that I would add on the democracy side of things is, you very quickly, even if you're an advocate of democracy and you want to try and do it well, you run into this problem of, is it simple majority? So for instance, as soon as I don't have a question of an up-down question or a binary question of some sort, as soon as there's a third thing to vote on, now I could have my vote split 3 ways. And if I have a simple majority requirement, then 30% of the people carry the day. If they are 31% of the people may carry the day if 3 things are being voted on, and so
That's that plurality.
That's that plurality that you're talking about. So that's the actually you did define that as plurality, and but that is even advocates of democracy see that as a problem. Is my point. So that's the only thing that I would bring up about that. And then, the founders were students of history, and there have been, examples through history of actual democracies where just everything was put to a vote. It was always a referendum on everything, from the laws to what should be done to a person, to officials and what their capacities might be. And it just gets crazy.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, let's hit up that quote and tell us about the book, maybe, and then we'll go from there.
So this is a book, and I wish I had the jacket, but I don't. It's called The Total State. It's by a gentleman named Aaron McIntyre, and he's a YouTuber and an author and very well-studied guy, well-read guy. The interesting thing is that this is a discussion of and a expansion upon some work by a previous author named Curtis Yarvin, who has did a lot of work over the past 10, 15, 20 years. He's been at it quite a while, but really very widely read and examining how different types of governments work and that sort of thing. But this is an application of some of Curtis Yarvin's work to what's happening in the United States right now, and then more generally to democracies around the world. And so the book is called The Total State, and I highly recommend it. The subtitle to it is How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies.
Yep.
And so I brought you a quote, and I want to share it with everybody. You and I had talked about it one of the other episodes that I joined you on. We were talking about progressivism, and one of the key things of the progressive era was the democratic election, or the popular election of senators.
Right.
Became a thing. So that was a change from the original Constitution. It was a constitutional amendment. And so he weighs into that and is talking about how in America we've trended more toward democratic means of doing things. That's one example of that. But I just wanted to share a quote with everybody from this book. It says, "With the direct election of senators, the creation of presidential primaries, and the vast expansion of presidential powers, the nature of how the government was selected was fundamentally altered. With the introduction of mass democracy, every branch was now subject to the same selective force, public opinion.
Yeah.
Control of information and manipulation of public perception were now the only necessary levers of power." And he goes on to say, "Those best able to control the opinions and passions of the electorate would dominate all three branches of American government, even the judiciary, which in theory is the branch most insulated from the whims of the electorate, is selected by the president and approved by the legislature, both of which are now completely dependent on public opinion. Oligarchs with their financial ability to influence mass media, education, and marketing quickly proved to be the social force most able to manipulate public opinion."
And there you go.
And so I felt like that was a quote that sort of encapsulated maybe the moment that we find ourselves in right now. Here we are in an election year, presidential election year. It's been very adventurous, very,
not to overuse and oversimplify, but it's been interesting.
It's been very interesting, yeah, right?
And maybe one would say remarkable.
Mm-hmm, remarkable. And ancient curse, may you live in interesting times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here we are in interesting times, and I thought that encapsulated a little bit probably where we find ourselves right now, particularly with the advent of the internet and mass and social media. Everybody has the means to reach a fairly wide audience in the palm of their hand right now.
So that swing of the public opinion, that is, I don't know, it appears to be that is the goal. And if you go back to that, I forget the guy's name, that heuristic he came up with, the purpose of a system is what it does, and it isn't what it doesn't do. Right. It appears as though our entire, I'm going to say society, so everything encapsulating the citizenry, our culture, everything, the society, our government, our entertainment, all of our activities and work, seems to be built around and make it conducive to the swaying of public opinion. And it's not, I don't think there was some there could have been a coordinated effort, but let's assume that wasn't coordinated. There are a number of things that are now in place, and you mentioned them. You have telecommunications that spawned in the mid 20th century,
Right.
And so your voice can be heard and your face can be seen throughout the world. But right now we're just talking about the U.S. And then in the late 20th century, and it blossomed and blew up, the social media with Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, among others. Those are three of the most prominent. Now Twitter's called X, of course. And so, in fact, if you think of the old Twitter days, the outsized influence of the government to what was said and allowed to be said on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and all those was it's now documented that the government was apparently swaying opinion. And I think it's not out of the bounds of this discussion to point at one prominent thing besides this election where it looks that way. We'll talk about the election in just a minute. But when you look at the concerted messaging and anti-messaging during the whole COVID fiasco,
Right.
You had people that had differing opinions on testing, on whether or not this was a real threat, whether it was really a pandemic, and the treatment of it in spite of the data that said that, hey, it's not that bad. We have ivermectin, we have hydroxychloroquine, we have, I can't remember what the one that starts with a D, these three treatments that you can use that are fairly cheap that we can use to treat anybody that has it. And also, by the way, we can prevent it. Those voices were quashed.
Right.
And a lot of folks that ran inside the circles rather of the quote unquote medical establishment, research scientists, research MDs, their votes are quashed and their eyes were open like, hey, what else? What else have I kind of drank the Kool-Aid on? So anyway, and you had the media, also the corporate media. And again, a lot of good folks inside that wheelhouse. And we were all subject to the same type of drum beating that this was a hazard and this was a danger. And it turns out it wasn't any such thing. But the corporate media, that was the voice that, hey, we need to get our shots. We need to stay in our houses. We need to avoid grandma. We need to do this, that, and the other thing. Turns out it was all based off of just a throne of lies. Mm-hmm. And government trying to entice everyone to get the vaccine, trying to and mandating things that they really don't have authority to legislate on, but they were calling it a mandate, which it's not a law. It's just a sturdy suggestion, maybe. But it sounds pretty official. So those three things, I've left out the entertainment industry. They were co-opted to shame people that didn't have the vaccine, that were resisting it, that were avoiding, going in the right direction in the grocery store and wearing masks and all that. So it looked like there was this concerted effort by it. They shouldn't be singing the same song, but they were all singing the same song. Was that what the founders were warning us against about swaying public opinion?
I think probably so. I think that it is the real danger there is that the easiest thing to do if I'm in a pure democracy where I have to have 50% plus one, I'll use that terminology, but I just have to have one more vote than the other side, right? In a pure democracy like that, then it's a very low bar. It's a very easy lift to coerce half the people into doing a thing, and fear is a great motivator of that. And in defense of some folks who came around to the other side, they understood that we don't know everything there is to know about this virus when it first happened. Mm-hmm. And so that's why most people were probably willing to go along with 10 days to flatten the curve,
yeah.
Right? but then when 10 days turned into more and substantially more,
Yeah.
then when people started to ask questions, you started to see the actual fangs come out, and the molding. Instead of quashing of certain voices, what I'll say is look at it more as the molding of public discourse, right? The guiding of public discourse by who? Who made the decisions, which direction that public discourse would go. And so in a country that prides itself on the importance of the individual, and this is a country it's a government by the people, for the people, all of a sudden eyes were open to we really didn't get a say in that in the things that were done. We know that we were not consulted. And maybe in an emergency, that's exactly what we want to have happen, right? Maybe that is the reason that we have a president, to make emergency decisions. But at some point, you have to, the representative government has to take place, and it never actually did happen during the COVID pandemic.
No, in the media. So you look at the stated purpose of. The express purpose of the First Amendment, which is one of many purposes within that First Amendment, because it covers many things, but addressing grievances and that sort of thing. But the media, the press being free. There's some danger. There's a whole bunch of little variables that go into that, and I'm going to talk about one briefly, and then I'll get to the main point. The credentialing of media. Should scare us. And why should it scare us? Well, we just saw an example of, that's not a recognized media source, or the press. That's not a real guy of the press. That's not a real journalist. Well, who says? How do you define that? If the government is defining who the press are, we're in trouble. Because the press should be outside of that sphere of influence. And if I'm relying on the government to say, that guy you can listen to, but that guy over there is crazy, you don't want to listen to him, there's something wrong there. Because then anybody that is ordained as press is now going to be, doing the work of the government if they want to keep their paycheck. Period. End of story. Full stop. Otherwise, they're going to lose their job.
Or they will lose access to the politicians that give them their stories, right? And so it's the access is the golden carrot.
That is. The funny thing is, at the time of the founding, it was just widely known that the press, like if you had a newspaper, well, that newspaper was paid for by this guy in authority, this politician, that politician, this pillar of the community over here. They had their opinions, and they wanted their opinions to be the strongest voice. And so newspapers that were published at the time, not credentialed, they were in the pocket of the guy paying their paychecks, which stands to reason. There should be no surprise in that. But if you have a healthy media, if you have a healthy press, there is no bar that the government says, yeah, this is high enough. You can jump into this pool and call yourself media or press, then there'll be an abundant voices, journalists, and so there'll be competing voices, and then the individual can make up their own mind after reading what this guy says, what that person says, what this gal's writing over here. You can make your own mind up, which is the way it should be. I forget where I was ultimately going in that, but any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. My jury's still a little bit out on the media. I believe that the old way of doing media that I grew up with, and that we grew up with 3 channels, and I've heard it referred to here lately as linear media, as opposed to this new wave of new media where people are doing podcasts, where anybody, yeah, and people are doing citizen reporting and things like that. I actually believe that that's at first I was kind of against it because any knucklehead with a phone, with a smartphone, or even the lowliest of recording setups, right, could get their opinion out to a very wide audience.
Right.
And we do see some people that, in my opinion, are morbidly stupid that have, millions of followers.
Right.
So at first I was sort of against that, but in a way, if I believe in the individual's ability to discern, truth, or at least I believe that we ought to be giving people the opportunity to discern truth for themselves. I kind of think that the advent of the internet is probably a good thing, but it has for that decentralization of the transfer of information or the communication of information. But it's still fraught with hazard, and I don't think we know how to use it quite yet.
It is fraught with hazard, but this is not dissimilar. There's a common theme here between this and the freedom that we should have enjoyed during the COVID response, where the government mandated a lot of activity,
right,
and restricted activity just because they said so, and so there is risk there to the individual if they didn't do that, and if I could make up my own mind. And then there's risk also if anybody can be a journalist and anybody can produce a podcast or do reporting. There's risk there to the individual of who are you listening to. And this goes back to that age-old thing of if you sacrifice your freedom for safety, you'll have neither.
Neither, yep.
It might have been Ben Franklin. He might have been quoting somebody else for all I know. But in other words, if you sacrifice your freedoms as an individual of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then eventually, you're going to be completely controlled. And that goes back to this whole democracy thing. Mm-hmm. You said something about that linear media, and I've heard this. I've had several thoughts about this, but I want to ask you, cold. Was the the big three, Walter Cronkite, David Brinkley, I can't remember who the
I was really going to congratulate
NBC.
you if you come up with that.
I forget the NBC.
Harry Reasoner?
Harry Reasoner, or he was a CBS guy, I think. John Chancellor?
Could be John Chancellor, yeah.
Those three right there, the big three, they were purported to be this balanced, middle of the road,
straight
just
down the middle.
Facts.
Yeah.
Is that true?
No.
Okay. I'm glad you had the same response that I.
That's my cold answer. But you know what? I give that in retrospect too, and with a little bit of shame. I call myself a version 0 Gen Xer, right? So I was born in '65, right at the end of the baby boomers, and came up with all of that stuff, and I believed sort of that was that. They were just giving the news.
Right. They had a desk, a suit.
I mean,
they're on TV. I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a poll in the 70s that Walter Cronkite was maybe the most trusted person in America.
Yeah, that's right.
Polls to that effect, and so they had if you just look at it in just purely objectively as you can, that's a tremendous amount of power over people's opinions, because people's opinions form how they vote and how they go about doing their life, and whether or not they're willing to lock themselves in, when a pandemic is upon us and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, my answer is no, they weren't. In retrospect, they were not. But I also think that Americans had a lot more similarity in the value structures that they were applying to things. We hadn't separated quite so much, hadn't gotten so far away from our values of religion and common decency, and we've done a complete 180. When I was in grade school, it was right at the beginning of the civil rights era, where civil rights was now the law of the land. 63, I think that was passed. So civil rights is now the law of the land, and the idea was to be colorblind. It was, we are going to follow the Martin Luther King's ideas of content of character. And so I think that more people on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, were coming from a more similar set of values, and we hadn't separated quite so much on those human values yet.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with. I had that same response about were they unbiased, and that maybe that's the most fair term. That's the most generous term.
Yeah.
In fact, I would, and I'm not saying any one of those big three anchors that we talked about, but that they were corrupted. I'm not willing to say that yet without some kind of evidence, but we do know that our government was involved in shaping policy through the corporate media.
Absolutely.
Through those big three. And then later on through PBS, just openly and blatantly. So we know that because it's admitted in the record, the congressional record. So check out the Church Committee if you want to find out more. And I'm not going to go into too many more details because we'd like to remain on the YouTube.
Indeed.
But definitely do your own research on that, because if you think that those three were uncorrupted, those three big networks were uncorrupted, you've got another thing coming. I mean, it's clear. There were several events, the Tet Offensive, that public opinion was manipulated through the media.
Indeed.
And that's very dangerous, and that should have served as a warning to us. But if you're going to control a population of people, any population of people, you have to control information flow, what they're presented, and you have to be repetitive, and you have to establish some element of trust, and you have to push them in a direction. You have to think the long game, and you have to keep them distracted from what it is they should be paying attention to. It's like the old magician that, he's waving his hand over here. In the meantime, he's
picking your pocket.
He's just doing whatever he wants with that other hand, because you're fascinated by what he's going to do, and you're enthralled because he's doing a trick. Well, that's what tyrannists and dictators do.
They do.
That's what they do. So yeah, that media, they were not pure as the driven snow.
Well, and I would say that your own words, you kind of challenge yourself with your own words there. And going back to the thought about, we're going to actually have to go and find this quote now. Who said this? But that a system.
Purpose of a positive.
Yeah, the purpose of a system is what it does, right? So for you to, if you believe that, for you to say that that these three big anchors were somehow corrupted, is if the system is what it does, they were doing what they were supposed to be doing.
Right. Whether they knew it or not, they were doing it.
Whether they knew it or not, and whether, but it brings us back around to that original question that we asked about, do we have, so Ben Franklin's answer, coming out of the Constitutional Congress, apparently, or by legend, was, what kind of a government have you given us, Mr. Franklin? A republic, if you can keep it.
If you can keep it.
Maybe the question that we have on the table today is, did we keep it?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And maybe that is, maybe that's the title of the podcast, right? Did we keep it? I think it's important to understand that, or to consider that.
At least as a thought experiment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's jump over to the election.
Okay.
Because I think, and we'll come back to that question. So we talked about the shaping of public opinion over the COVID response. There have been other instances, like the border invasion and all that sort of thing.
Indeed.
So when you look at the election, a great episode that what you have. And I'm gonna title this section "A Moving Finger Writes," and that's another quote from another famous guy that Peter Sellers in the Pink Panther quoted. "A moving finger writes," and I love that because that defines, basically, if there is a signature to be observed, you got to look and see what that individual's doing over time. You know, it's just like data. Data are accurate, so you're going to see what the trend is.
What the trend is, spotting the trends.
Right. So a moving finger right. So what we had, it wasn't that long ago, up to 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, all we heard was from the media with respect to our current president that he's sharp as a tack. In fact, there's a great string of videos on the YouTubes where a series of reporters and anchors and media type and talking heads, keep using the term, he's sharp as a tack, he's sharp, he's at the top of his game, on and on and on about our current president. And then it seemed to be amplified towards the end before his withdrawal from the nomination of him as the candidate running for the Democrat Party, not Democratic. The Democrat Party, it seemed to be amplified. And, by the way, if you said, the guy's been out to lunch since before the election, like when he was, quote-unquote, campaigning during COVID, during the 2020 run-up to the election, he would just ramble on and muddle his words just like I'm doing now. And it was just near incoherent and almost to the point, if I didn't have a different opinion of Joe Biden, that goes way back to the Clarence Thomas hearings, that I was really starting to pay attention to politics at that point. He's not a kind guy, but it almost bordered on elderly abuse. So how do we get from that sharp as a tack, the media in concert were saying how great he was, how sharp he was, and top of his game, to days later, he's out of it. He really needs to step out to protect our democracy, and so now, that opinion was shaped one way, whether or not people believed it or not, but the diehards were believing it, and then, now they're saying, well, he shouldn't be running. He should withdraw. It's the same people that just said 2 weeks, or not even 2 weeks ago, days ago, that he shouldn't run. That we're questioning anybody that would actually question his ability to run. And then now these same people are saying, well, we need to throw all of our support in order to protect democracy behind his vice president, Kamala Harris. So am I supposed to believe you now? So you lied to me during COVID. You clearly lied to me because it was very obvious he's he struggles with mental acuity issues, just broadly.
Yep. Accurate.
And then you come out like the next day and say, well, no, he's not the guy. But this person really knows what they're doing. And then to further another data point for this moving finger rights theme, Kamala Harris was appointed the border czar. Those were the words that the media used. Those are the words that the president used. Those are the words that she used. She was going to solve the border problem. Up until last night, because I looked, she was listed on Wikipedia as the border czar, one of a long line of border czars, and many other czars that are have there. And that I have a problem with any of our politicians being called a czar. Yeah, which is a root out of Caesar, who was a dictator. So that, and then now today, that's scrubbed, and now you are a conspiracy theorist.
Memory hole. Yep.
Yeah, it's memory hole. If you question and say, she was the border czar. No, she wasn't. Well, I thought the border there was no issues with it, but now you're afraid of it. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so now the media has told us, and there's a third piece there's a third act to the Joe Biden thing, which is now that he has stepped aside, he's a hero and maybe possibly the greatest American president.
Clearly.
Certainly the greatest living American president. And this is the flip on the media. You can also find a lot of mileage at looking at how the media has treated Kamala Harris, a la border czar and that sort of thing. They have not been a fan of hers until day before yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So it's blatantly obvious that the media come down wholly on one side, and that they will do whatever it takes to pump up whatever candidate gets put in front of them. which completely diverts people's attention away from one very fundamental question. If you're telling me that democracy is on trial here or democracy is on the ballot, explain to me exactly the democratic process whereby Kamala Harris becomes the candidate for the Democrat Party.
Right.
So if you are the defenders of democracy, show me your purity. How did you arrive at that?
Yeah. Did everyone vote for her? Did she get a
Exactly.
plurality, a majority, or did she even vote?
All right. The answer is she has never actually received one primary vote.
That's right.
In any presidential election ever, because she was so roundly unpopular that she had to withdraw from the primary before the primaries were actually held in the 2020 presidential election.
Right. And so unpopular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she is she's labeled as the most liberal, I would say the most Marxist, when she served as a senator.
Agreed.
And like that would, during interviews, that would be posed to her, and then once she laughed at it, and then two, she absorbed that. I mean, she took that in. She's proud of that history of her voting record of voting for the most insanely left policies and Marxist. I'm just going to call them Marxist policies because that's what they are.
Right. Yeah, you won't be able to find any of this in the record. There won't be any critical analysis of her record because this is what our politics have come to at this point. So the single focus of the media and the Democrats is to defeat Donald Trump, period. It's not to present an agenda, a political agenda that is more appealing to the American citizens. It is to defeat Donald Trump and retain power.
Right.
By the way, I'm not giving the Republican side a pass on this either because, they're going to say all the same bad things about the Democrat side. It's a malady that exists on both sides of the political question, I think. But the media is what we're talking about here. The manipulation of public opinion is in the hands essentially of the media, and the media are hand in glove with one side of the political spectrum.
Agreed. And it's clear to me, it's clear to you that the media they're now caught in blatant hypocrisy. And they've been caught several times in several significant instances the past few years about their hypocrisy or their just blatant dishonesty. We're talking the corporate media. So do you find it strange that there's this much, and I'm not asking you to come out and describe your feelings about President Trump as a politician or whether or not he was an effective president. That's completely beside the point. But isn't it particularly interesting that someone with his background and he has never been a political figure before 2016, but then in earnest, slightly before 2016, but then 2016 when he ran the first time in earnest and actually got traction. But this, it's like everybody that's part of the quote unquote establishment, a lot of Republicans, most Democrats, the media, the entertainment industry. The entertainment industry absolutely loved him. They loved him on The View. They loved him everywhere because he's an entertaining guy. But then now it's to the point where they call him Hitler. They call him a threat to democracy. On it goes. Why so much vitriol against this guy? Why is everyone seem to be stacked up against Donald Trump with relation to this public opinion bit?
Right. With relation to the public opinion bit, it is because he is all of those things. He is very popular and he is a showman. He can sway public opinion personally. He himself has enough gravitas to go up against the entire media establishment and hold his ground. I won't say win. He's not president right now. He didn't win in 2020. Mm-hmm. But he has that ability, and he represents a threat to the establishment on both sides, both the Republican side and the Democrat side. If you do a rational analysis of what's going on in the Republican Party, it's been blown to pieces. You know, the coalition that was there at the end of the Obama administration has completely been blown up. You had one night of the Republican National Convention, which just ended last week, headlined by the boss of the Teamsters Union.
Yeah.
I don't know that I believe that I would live to see that day.
I never would've.
You know, unions were firmly, you know, in the camp of the Democrat Party.
Right. And we all know that the Democrat Party is all about the working man.
Indeed. Yeah. But those coalitions are shifting. And so what Trump has done is he has come in and, for better or for worse, you know, he's used that entertainment value, he's used that gravitas, that ability to attract people, to attract a weird and wonderful coalition of voters to him. But a lot of people that felt like they weren't being heard by, by the establishment that was both the Democrat and Republican sides of the aisle.
Right.
And that is a threat to that establishment. You know, there are a lot of folks talk about the uniparty out there, and that what they mean by that is that the best analogy that I've ever heard is it's sort of like the Harlem Globetrotters and the Washington Generals, right? You know, the Democrats were the Harlem Globetrotters, and the Republicans were the Washington Generals. They came along, they got to be on the court with them,
right?
But they
got a cut from the ticket sales.
They got a cut from the ticket sales, and they got to every once in a while score a point and that sort of thing. But they were always the butt of the joke. They were always the result of the hijinks and that sort of thing.
Right.
And that has been the way our politics have sort of been. That might be, a little too hyperbolic, but I think it's a great illustration.
It's a great illustration. So are we the refs or are we the audience? That's what I want to know.
Well, yeah, because the refs were in on it.
Yes,
so we're not the refs. We're the audience, just sort of enjoying the show, I think. And so now, here we are. We've worked ourselves all the way into, you have to make it like a 1984 reference at this point, right? Because the book 1984 talks about all these things, about going back just a step to what we were just talking about as far as the media and public opinion, where the media loved Joe Biden, he's sharp as a tack. And then after his debate performance, the bat signal went out and they decided he has to go. And so then they hated him. And now that he has, done the patriotic thing and backed out, now he's the greatest living American president, so they've gone back and forth and they are doing it completely unironically. You won't see, and by that I mean they're doing it without any self-reflection whatsoever. There's no shame in doing this. They just
zero.
Yesterday I was praising the guy. Today I'm cursing the guy, or acting like nobody had ever seen this before. And then tomorrow, once he's gone and things are back the way I want them to be, then, I'll praise him. And that's a very dystopian kind of a place to be. And we're witnessing it, with our own eyes.
We are witnessing it. And whether or not you have an opinion about, I think everyone has an opinion about Donald Trump, but whether or not he would be a good president, or whether he's the best candidate for the Republicans or whatever. So all of that is kind of beside the point. If you just watch the show that's going on, this movie that seems to be playing out, that I'm enjoying, I'm enjoying it.
Get your popcorn.
Oh yeah, I have
fasten your seatbelt.
It is playing out, and it's enjoyable to see more and more people pay attention to this, and they're like, hey, what is the deal with this? What is the deal with that? Why yesterday they said this, now they're saying that, and it's the total opposite. It's 180 out. George Clooney raises $30 million for Biden. 2 weeks later, he writes an op-ed piece in the Washington or the Wall Street Journal, I think, saying he needs to step away. What is going on? It's not like there was some kind of precipitous event that made Joe Biden different. It's the same guy. So
I have a theory about that.
All right, go ahead.
The bat signal went out because he was losing to Trump.
The bat signal went out. I don't know if it was necessarily the losing to Trump because I think they knew. Because, I mean, we look at Trump's ralies. He's getting, hundreds of thousands of people at these rallies. And they can't draw a crowd that would fill this room in a lot of cases without
and it's a
booed.
pretty small room.
It's a very small room. It looks big on the screen. When you watch this on YouTube or Rumble.
Awesome. We look like we're in a warehouse.
Yeah. So I forget where I was going with that, but they knew, and they know it was a time thing. So you talked about not one vote when she was running in the 2020 election, Kamala. The Democrats have a different set of rules for their nominating process for the president, and they have everyone, both parties, they elect delegates, and those delegates from your district, they're the ones that represent the will of the people that voted in that election. That would be a plurality of the people because not everybody votes, and they have a certain amount of latitude, but you got to sleep in that bed that you make. So, but they most of the time just go to that table and they actually vote at the convention and say, yeah, that's our guy or that's our gal. But the Democrats have a separate set of delegates that they've identified called superdelegates.
Superdelegates.
And the superdelegates, their votes are weighted heavier. So I think they got to the point they knew he was in trouble from jump, and they got to a point like, okay, after that debate, now we've got a reason to say no, and we're close enough to where we don't have to go through this nominating process because we want, right now it's Kamala. It could change. This year has been crazy enough. The past 3 years have been insanely crazy. This year has been exponentially more crazy.
Indeed.
But
if you thought it could get any crazier than the COVID era.
Yeah. So by all rights, it's the indications. She got the endorsement of both of the Obamas. And it looks like she's going to be the nominee. They're still going to have their convention in Chicago. Who knows what's going to happen? But all indications right now are that she's going to be the nominee. It still could go crazy. But the bottom line is they waited till all that stuff is passed before they did this. So back to I want to ask you a follow-up question to that, because it's clear that somebody's doing some manipulation. It's clear that the media are in on it. It's clear that the entertainment industry is in on it, a la George Clooney. Sure. And everybody seems to be like angled towards Trump. And I asked you why. Like, I just want to ask a follow-up. His policies were not that crazy.
No, not at all. When
he was president. He had a lot of things he wanted to get done that apparently didn't get done to completion, on the surface. There were a lot of things that he did that were a net good for us, and I don't think anybody could argue that now. I have other opinions related to that, but that's for another episode in the future. But why? If he wasn't that crazy of a president and didn't have harebrained schemes, and he turned out to be, by all rights, a pretty good president at the time, because we had prosperity and we had peace, and we were left alone, and he was breaking down the regulation society that exists. So why would everybody be so against that guy? Because they could just, okay, well, he's got one more term. The earth didn't blow up. Why would they be so virulent against him?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. And it's interesting, just to reinforce that point that you're making. So Biden did immediately change, a bunch of energy policy to answer to his coalition when he first came into office. Obviously, he made some changes at the border.
Yep.
But in general, a lot of the trade policy and monetary policy, the things that were going on, the Biden administration didn't make any changes to the Trump policies.
Right.
There's I follow a commentator named Peter Zion who probably a lot of folks know who that is, but he says that basically the Biden administration just ran all the all the Trump policies through a spell checker and took them all out of all caps and just reinstituted what he had. And so they weren't that crazy, but I think there are a couple of things. They beat this, they beat the anointed one. They beat Hillary Clinton, who is unarguably one of the high leaders of the Democrat Party. Folks, when people were looking for who's going to endorse Kamala Harris, who are they looking to? They were looking to the Obamas and the Clintons,
right,
and then everybody else, right? And so he came in and beat with the system the person who was supposed to be president, and there was a lot of just flat out, I think, just anger over that, and and so that's why I think we saw some of the just irrationality that we saw,
the derangement,
yeah, absolutely. And I really believe it's as simple as that. It's just that's not the way it was supposed to go. We had it set up to go this other way, and. But I think it takes us back around to our question of, are we, is our system, are we delusional in thinking that our system did we keep it? Did we keep the republic? Is it working the way it was supposed to, or was all of that for show?
I think at some point in the past, I can't put a finger on specifically when, but there are a lot of good indications of when it was obvious that it was changing, an inflection point. But that progressive era that we talked about on our last episode, at the early 20th century, the progressive era really goes back further than that, with like around the mid-1800s.
Right.
That progressive movement in a number of venues, like in churches, there was a lot of softening of church doctrine, Christian doctrine, altering the doctrine. There was a lot of that kind of thing going on. Of course, you got Marx, who wrote his Unhinged Rant, that was basically a book on envy, and that's about it. And then it started really gaining ground in the early 20th century. So that's definitely an inflection point for the U.S. The creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the passage of those three key progressive amendments that we talked about, prohibition, slightly less so, but still nonetheless part of the social gospel, which goes back to that mid-1800s social gospel, that movement that started to kick off altering sound Christian doctrine, direct election of senators, and the income tax amendment. That's an inflection point for sure. The moving off the gold standard, having purely fiat currency by 1972, the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, and the Watergate incident, which I'm kind of re-looking at that with a new set of eyes based off
media
of
thing.
Yeah. It's very peculiar who was involved on that inner circle that did that. Did you know that Richard Nixon was the most popular president when he's elected the second time before he resigned? The most popular president since they started taking polls.
Wow.
With everybody. And it's just unique. And now if you think Richard Nixon, you think of this bumbling idiot who was crooked and was a racist, and on it goes. It's funny how anybody the media doesn't like is a racist. That goes back to swaying popular opinion. So at any rate, there have been a number of inflection points, including, I think we talked about this maybe at breakfast, there have been interesting assassination attempts by our presidents. We'll just list the presidents. Lincoln, that's kind of a one-off maybe. It might be related. But McKinley was assassinated. And he was a big proponent of the gold standard, and the Gold Act was what he was pushing. when and Kennedy was against secret societies, he was assassinated, and now there's it's now this open secret that there was a government agency that was involved in that to some extent. Personally, I think they were heavily involved in it, but that's Adam's opinion. That's a largely ignorant opinion, but and then Reagan was assassinated, or I'm sorry, the assassination attempt on Reagan, and then now we have the assassination attempt on Trump. There's a trend there that moving finger writes.
It does.
And so I'm concerned about that. And so when, are we now a constitutional republic? Are we truly governed? We're not governed the same as at the inception. That much we can agree on. But are we really a democracy at the root of it, with a lot of the structural changes with the amendment process and the way the media, and I'm going to say not just the reporter type of media, but media at large, entertainment included, it seems as though our opinions are shaped by everything that we absorb through all these means. And I'm going to go further. And this guy, I'll just turn this back to a question. There's been so much, it's almost like whiplash back and forth and revealing of, the mask is slipping off this influence by media at large and their attempt at influencing public opinion. Do you think that's somehow intentional, not by those that were in charge of the media, but by somebody else? It's like, hey, now watch what they do, because they're going to respond this way, the media, and they're going to try to influence. But it's now going to help our cause, the Patriots' cause, let's say, that the people are going to start waking up and seeing it. This is ridiculous. What are your thoughts?
So I tend to shy away from the, I hate to even call it conspiracy theories. We had this conversation at breakfast. I hate to call it conspiracy theories because the term conspiracy theory is a conspiracy in and of itself, right?
Yes.
It's an attempt to moderate and mold public opinion, right? Or to shut down discourse on, questionable things.
Mm-hmm.
The current, questionable things are the series of mistakes or errors that led up to a successful assassination attempt. In other words, the trigger was actually pulled and Trump was actually hit with a bullet. Mm-hmm. The assassination was not successful, but the attempt was certainly successful.
Right.
To get there and actually be able to pull the trigger. And so, all of those things are going to get rolled conveniently into it's conspiracy theory, and so I think that the notion that I tend to shy away from there being people in a back room, coming up with something as grand as what you just, what
It's
you
just
just
a thought
posited.
experiment.
But what I do think it is that, let's go back to what we were talking about, trends, right? The data don't lie. And people tend to follow trends, and there's a lot of data that, human instinct is to sort of like go along with the crowd if you don't have a better idea, or if you're uninformed, you just kind of go with the flow, that sort of thing. I think that the sort of like population dynamic, the group dynamic, tends to cause things to go in certain directions. And so the notion that people are waking up a little bit, I think, has as much to do with the fact that, they are, more people are walking around with smartphones in their hands, more people are on social media, more people have a smorgasbord of different thoughts and ideas to listen to. It's very hard to get everybody on the same sheet of music anymore. And so I think maybe what you're seeing is more like societal trends as a result of that decentralization of information flow that has come about as part of the advent of the internet. Mm-hmm. So, maybe I'm just anti, conspiracy theory. I know that I told you at breakfast that I really don't want there to be a conspiracy with the. I would really rather just be an ineptitude with the Trump assassination attempt.
Mm-hmm.
I really would, and there's room for that. There's room for it to simply be that kind of ineptitude. But I think part of that is just me saying, I don't want there to be that depth of corruption in our government,
Mm-hmm.
in the United States government. Now that might be a Pollyanna. Maybe I'm just in denial. I don't know, but I really would rather it be ineptitude, because that feels like something that we can deal with.
Yeah.
The level of corruption it would take to get to that point,
That gets messy.
that gets really messy, and
then who do you trust?
who do you trust?
Yeah.
So
I let me second that, what you just said there, because that is a perfectly normal way of thinking. That I also want it to be just some simple, this lone gunman. That's it. And it's a perfectly normal response to desire that, for that reason that you talked about. What I think we're saying, and this, I'm not saying this about the assassination attempt at all, but there have been several things, because I'm not even close to being there yet on which way that goes. I've got some loose opinions, but they're unformed and not congealed yet. Doesn't mean that I'm ruling it out. There have been several episodes of the past several years that things that I thought there's no way that that's going on with respect to medical authorities and local governments. And I've always had an apprehension about, going by, whenever the crowd's going this way, I'm like, why is everybody doing that? I avoid crowds literally and figuratively. I'm not a bandwagon guy. And I always get apprehensive whenever I see anybody whipping up over any individual. Cults of personality,
yes,
I am deeply suspicious of at all times. So I try to avoid that at all costs. But there have been several episodes where I have slowly kind of woke up to, or awakened, I'll say that, to, there is no other rational explanation for this set of circumstances and set of facts. And I've kind of gone, 180 and at least 90 or maybe, 120 on a number of issues, because I didn't want them to be true. But then as time went on, it's like, well, there's no other explanation left. So I guess more to follow. We'll discuss more on this podcast, and you and I will discuss more breakfast, and maybe we'll bring breakfast in here one time.
Translate it. Yeah, have breakfast on the podcast.
Yeah, just sit here and eat our eggs and bacon and hash browns and toast.
Indeed.
And coffee.
Let me ask you a question real quick on that note. Before we wrap up here, I guess. But when you talk about avoiding a cult of personality, is that what the Republican Party has become under Trump?
That's a great question. That is a great question. I go back in particular. Let me give you some context. I was not a Trump fan through 2016. I had one particular reason why I wasn't. That it's not. I'm not going to share that here. And just it just seemed like this. Just the showman that was now changing gears. Yep. But I've come around on him quite a bit, in spite of those things I just described to you. And then now, everything that I see him do, I see it fall in line with the people that I do not trust at all, hate his guts. And so then I'm like, okay, well, that fits. That fits. I have my suspicions on why that is, and again, I'm not going to share that on this podcast. But I still keep that in reserve about not trusting crowds, not trusting the majority, avoiding rushing to a decision because everybody else is excited, and we should do that. We should 100% do that. No matter what, what the guy is saying, you want to make sure, and Trump in this instance, we want to make sure that he's not this guy that's leading us off a cliff, because that could happen too.
And I think that's what, just a call back to Federalist 10, I think that's what Adams was talking about, in that don't be in a hurry to follow the crowd.
Yeah.
And that's why you want to avoid pure democracy. That's why they were very careful about crafting a government that didn't include pure democracy throughout. There's one chamber that is, it's 1/3 of one part of the chambers that are actually elected democratically.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what it is. Your aversion to following the crowd, I think you share that with one of the founders, or most of the founders, actually.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good that they're in agreement with me.
With you. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll end on that note. That was
that
was a great episode. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I did too. Good conversation. There are so many other things that we could go on and talk about. So more episodes to follow, perhaps.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to revisit maybe other facets of this. I will give you the answer, though. We're a constitutional republic, or we should be, and not a democracy. Whenever you hear someone say democracy, you should automatically be like, why are they saying that? Because that's not us. I can't stand it, and it's not a nit. It's not a nit.
It is not a nit.
It's
a
one
real
of my
thing.
things.
It's
As soon as I hear that, I'm like, stop talking about that. We are, and it's anyway. I could rant another hour on that. So on that note, we'll just close out. Thank you for your time again, Tony.
I love it. I really enjoy having these conversations. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And come back soon, Dusty. Looking forward to seeing you.
Absolutely.
Bye.